Hi, I'm Tyler Bro, and this is my final glider design. I called it Time Warp due to its short flight time due to its warped wing. More on that later. So the project description, the goal was to design, create, and fly a balsa wood glider that would travel a minimum of 20 feet in a straight line without braking. So if it veered off from the straight course, only its straight distance would be measured. And additional constraint is it had to fit within a 16 by 16 inch square, which can be seen here. And I had decided to maximize that constraint. Measurements with success for each are pretty straightforward. If it fits within the box, that's a success. Flies 20 feet, success. And if you can do that in a straight line without braking, that's successful. Especially when testing, I would consider successful if it was repetitive success, so not just one flight over 20 feet, but it would consistently break 20 feet and not shatter upon impact. So the first design alternative I considered was adding winglets. I did some research, especially a NASA article that mentioned that winglets can increase your stability and give you slightly more, better flight times. But in practice, all it really did was just add weight to my glider, and it didn't increase my flight time or my stability by a whole lot, so I didn't end up including that. Second alternative I considered was an elliptical planform. Now, from all the research that I had done, I found that the ideal planform would be an elliptical one, just for maximizing the performance of your glider. But after getting feedback from Checkpoint 1 from the TAs, they had said that the elliptical planform usually isn't successful in these type of balsa gliders, just due to it's so hard to get it perfectly, and there's so many different inconsistencies with the balsa, so I didn't end up including that either. And the third alternative I considered was minimizing skin friction with additional material such as saran wrap. Now, I didn't end up doing this. My glider is all balsa wood except for the Play-Doh and some putty on the wing to balance out weight and stability. But in theory, this would minimize skin friction, minimizing your drag forces on your glider, allowing it to travel further and have more lift. But again, in practice, it didn't really have a negative or positive effect on my glider when tested, so I didn't end up including it. So the highest probability of success is probably the skin drag method with saran wrap, just because it has the least negative effects. Even though the positive effects aren't that much, it would still work well. When sizing my vehicle, I did some research and found some basic guidelines I followed. So I started by maximizing my wingspan. The hypotenuse of a 16 by 16 inch right triangle is 22.62 inches, and so I decided to make my wingspan just under that at 22.5 inches. So that was the base dimension that I kind of based everything else off of. I found that your aspect ratio, you want to be between 4.5 and 7.5. Exceeding 7.5 can add too much stress to your wings, can cause them to break. So my aspect ratio ended up being 6.9, so just under the safe amount. I added a taper ratio on my wing, the trailing edge taper, because I found that type of taper added the most stability and made your glider fly straighter. And it's at 5 degrees. I found that exceeding 10 degrees would actually have adverse effects, so I was conservative and did a 5-degree taper. As far as location, from the nose, about 1 chord length from the nose is where this part of the leading edge of your wing should be. My chord length was 3.75 inches, that's the distance. From trailing edge to leading edge of horizontal stabilizer should be 2 chord lengths, and the area of this tail should be about 1/4 of the planform area, and the area of this should be about half of this part. The vertical should be half of the horizontal stabilizer, sorry. And so I started with those type of just those general constraints, and then kind of fine-tuned their locations so that I could get the performance that I wanted. In addition, I also added a dihedral of 5 degrees. I found that was the best dihedral to go for, or the best angle. And yeah. So I didn't follow all those exactly with the sizings. I started with that to get a base design, and then by testing, fine-tune the locations of all of my parts. So initially, everything was the same except for it was all elliptical. And after getting feedback, I switched to this trapezoidal sort of planform layout, and it works pretty well. It was very stable, except for it kept having excessive roll due to this warped wing. I didn't realize it was warped at first, so I kept adding weight over here, but it was still just spiraling out of control. And by the time I realized it was warped, it was too late to create a new wing, so I had to kind of stick with it. But even with that, it still easily cleared 20 feet. In fact, once I had fine-tuned it perfectly, it went well over 40 feet each time. So it definitely cleared requirements. To improve, I would most certainly laser cut these to get them better in general, I ended up running out of time to use a laser cutter, so these are hand cut and sanded. And I would also be more careful with my wood selection because this one ended up being warped. And so you can see my final design in better quality here. Its center of gravity is directly on quarter cord right here. There's a small pencil mark you can see right there. And the estimated coefficients of lift and drag, I got a coefficient of lift of 0.947 using the formula 2 times weight over rho times v squared times s. And then using that, my estimated coefficient of drag was 0.092 using the formula coefficient of lift squared over pi times e, the Oswald efficiency factor, which is 0.9, times 6.9, my aspect ratio. And under the assumption that your zero drag and your induced drag are the same, I multiplied this by 2 to get that number. The design iterations definitely improved my final performance. Initially, it broke on landing, so I added these stabilizers on the bottom of my wing, and so now it's much more stable. Overall, I'm very happy with my finished glider. I believe that if I would have designed it a little better, it would have flown much better, but still, even with it spiraling and diving, it went, I think 39 feet was my final flight, which you can see here. And you can see this is much better than my test flights. Here was my first test flight when it broke. And here's another test flight that I had done later with some improvements. As far as how it could be further improved, obviously not having this be warped. Also just some fine-tuning of sizing, like I think the tail dimensions, I didn't change much from those initial guidelines, so this could add a little more stability. But yeah, overall, yeah, this is my glider. Thank you, and here's references.